People who work in remote places, what creepy things have you seen while at work? Subscribe for more, and follow my Reddit page in the description to join in. I worked at a public forest. One day we had someone report a dead animal on the side of one of our trails. A few of us from the front desk hiked out to see what it was. It looked like a giant piece of liver, maybe? Just a pile of smooth red meat, no blood around. And it was wrapped up in a t-shirt, with some coins scattered around it. We called our rangers to go check it out, and one of them was pretty sure it was a placenta. The weird part is, you have to check in through a front desk. So someone either snuck a placenta/liver in or gave live birth/removed an organ on our trails. We never got an answer on what the pile of meat was, how it got there, or why. I do a lot of stream work, so I spend time out in pretty rural areas walking streams and rivers. Once my coworker and I were working in a more urban environment and came across what we initially thought was a body, which of course triggered "oh shit" from us, but it ended up being a firefighter's dummy that had fallen down a hill. We felt pretty dumb. Other notable things include a small grave in the middle of nowhere for someone's dog, pretty sad, and a stuffed rabbit with shotgun shells placed where its eyes should be, a mannequin very purposely placed in a chair in the middle of the woods, and lots of little random altars. I also did work in Myrtle Beach, what a hellhole, and accidentally walked into an inhabited homeless camp. I was peering into a stormwater grate when I looked up and saw a homeless person standing in his shelter staring at us and saying nothing. I felt like I was trespassing, so we quietly left. I work on North Sea oil rigs on an ad hoc basis, off the coast of Scotland. Wouldn't say anything was particularly paranormal creepy, but it can be very unsettling/weird place. Fog can come rolling in out of nowhere, and other rigs you can see off the sides can disappear in front of your eyes. Sometimes you can see the walkways 6 feet in front of you, or if you're walking over grating you can't see the sea below your feet, about 60 meters down from feck to sea, but you can hear it, albeit muffled. The fog can roll in over the course of a few minutes too, so a perfectly clear day becomes pea soup. You can also feel the rig moving/swaying on high wind/rough seas. Even though it's a fixed leg platform. Very unnerving to feel your office swaying when it shouldn't be. My last trip was my first ever night shift, and I found it particularly unsettling as you've got the background noise of the plant, but I walked around the whole rig without seeing another living soul for the whole shift. Usually there are about 130 people on board, although smaller rigs have smaller head counts. Usually once a trip I'm hit by this awareness that you are just very isolated and in the middle of nowhere. Most rigs I've worked on are an hour's chopper ride from land. So if things go wrong it can escalate very quickly. During college that was located away from major cities, the woods were all around us. That being said, there was a highly rated trail, the Loyal Sock Trail, which was about an hour drive from the university. I invited a friend to come with me as he had never been on an extended backpacking trip. A 50-plus mile trail that we intended to backpack over the 4-day weekend. I am an Eagle Scout who has spent countless hours in the woods and went on backpacking trips consistently throughout my college experience. As many have said before me, you get used to the minor spooky things happening, coyote howls, raccoons in the middle of the night, even the occasional unknown noise. The scariest thing to find in the woods, however, are people. We were about 20 miles into the trail, and, being Pennsylvania where the underbrush and trees line the trails pretty densely, I always walk about 100 meters off of the trail to reduce the chances of me disturbing people/people disturbing me, especially in the early morning when I choose to sleep in. Following that same strategy, my friend and I go out of our way to be in this amazing spot a good ways off of the trail where it would even be difficult to see our flashlights from the trail. This spot was on a peninsula where a creek met a river, meaning there was only one way into our camp and only one way out. We start a fire, cook our food, and drink some, but not enough to get either of us drunk. We put the fire out about midnight and head into our individual tents. All is quiet. It is the fall semester, so leaves are on the ground, the moon is brightly shining through the bare trees, and the air is cool. The only noise is the occasional time when I would hear my friend turn over in his sleep. Then, I hear the voices. The voices sounded very close for being on the trail 100+ meters away. I check my watch, 3 a.m. Who hikes at 3 a.m.? We are 20 miles in. I slowly get out of my sleeping bag, slowly unzip my tent, only to see my friend peeking out of his tent in the exact same fashion. He quickly moves his finger over his mouth in an exaggerated hush signal, then used the same hand to frantically motion towards the way of the trail. Then we see them. 4 adults, 3 men and 1 woman, walking directly towards our camp. No lights illuminating their path, they are walking silently at this point. Only one of them has a backpack, An impossibility for the long hike. They were 1/3 of the way through. Being a long trip, you bring wood cutting supplies to chop branches into smaller branches to burn. For me, this was a survival knife. Grabbing the knife, believing it is my only way of defending myself, I am more disheveled than I ever have been, especially knowing that a knife is barely defense at all. These people walk into our site, sit down by our extinguished fire pit, and just sit there for what felt like an eternity. My friend speaks up and asks what they are doing in our campsite. Without answering the question, they ask if we have any food. Having packed as lightly as possible for the long trip, we had only a few extra Mountain House, MRE-style meals. I grab one out of my bag and toss it to one of the men. In rapid succession, I ask why they aren't using a light, if they need help finding the trail, and why they are hiking so late. They respond with the following: "We don't use lights. We know where the trail is. It is better to hike late at night." Unnerved at this point, my friend asks them to leave. They respond by asking if we want to light the fire and hang out for a bit. No, we do not. They grab their bag, get up, and leave without speaking another word. We watch them leave and take shifts, making sure that they didn't come back. Needless to say, we both got very little sleep that night. When the sun rose the next morning, we finally got real sleep. By the afternoon, when we woke up, it all felt like a weird dream of sorts. The only evidence was a fuzzy cap that they must have dropped that I have to this day. I have never had something as weird/spooky as that happen in the woods and hope to never have it happen again. In the 8 years since that trip, I haven't been back to the Loyal Sauk Trail. On our drill ship that was built in China, we noticed on the drawings there was a room. We went to look at it and couldn't find an entrance, but the spacing was obvious there was an extra room. It might not sound so creepy unless you've been in these shipyards where two things are known to happen: stowaways, although I doubt it in this case, but also hundreds of workers at any given time following orders blindly. So we confirmed that the room had all 6 sides, yet not a single weld on the outside. There is only one way this could have happened, and I'm sure you're starting to get it now. They must have welded from the inside for this room and then realized they had no way out upon completion if the gases didn't kill them first. It's extremely heavy around that room. People say they hear things. I have definitely. This isn't some old ship either. I rode this ship from China to Amsterdam after completion and then the maiden voyage to America. I guess it happens quick. I'm a little late to this thread, but I hope this doesn't get buried because this story still haunts me. I worked as the county historic preservationist in southern Appalachia, working on the buildings and properties the county owned. One of the benefits included with my job was living on site at one of the historic properties. The historic house was an imposing brick mansion built in the 1810s, and I lived in a small caretaker's house about 20 feet away. This was in the backwoods, so to deter trespassing and vandalism the county had built an 8-foot-tall fence around the entire 5-acre parcel and put barbed wire on top of the fence. I mention this all just to show it was basically impossible for anyone, or anything, to jump or climb over the fencing and onto the property. One night, after working late at another property, I pulled up to my entrance gate, let myself in, locked it behind me, and then drove the 100 yards down the gravel road to my house. There were no lights on the property, so I could only see by my headlights. As I turned my car around the corner of one of the outbuildings and parked it, my lights shone on a thing that I still have a hard time describing effectively. It was the size of a deer, but with long spindly legs and long shaggy hair. Almost like a taller maned wolf, if you've ever seen pictures of one of those. That alone shook me, as there was no way something of that size should have been able to get through, or over my fencing. What follows is absolutely true. I got out of my car to get a better look at what the hell the thing was, and as I opened the door and got out, the thing took off running away, not on 4 legs, but on 2. I literally watched this thing raise its back up, stand at full height on its back legs, and sprint away. I absolutely freaked out at that point, grabbed my mag light and my shotgun from inside and tried to find the thing again. There was no trace. No tracks or anything. I have no idea how it got in or out of my property. I didn't sleep at all that night, just sat on my couch with my shotgun watching my front door, hoping that whatever I saw didn't come back and burst in. I cannot explain what the hell I saw that night, but it still raises the hair on my neck every time I think about it. I worked for a power company restoring power after a storm. Was working when a lady came up complaining that her power went out. We explained to her that's why we were there and she should have power back soon. She said, "Oh good, my son went down in the basement and now I can't find him." I went with her with a flashlight down the road to a rundown house that was partially caved in. She walked inside and I went to follow. As soon as I walked into the door she disappeared from my sight and I called for her multiple times. No one responded, so I ran back to her work truck to call for help. A man that was living on her street called to me asking what's wrong, and I told him the situation. He looked at me with a cold stare and said a mom and her son died in that house 4 years ago. I'm still shook to this day. My oldest brother used to work the overnight sprinklers on a golf course. He took me out one time just for fun, and as we were driving uphill on a fairway, a figure of a lady appeared in the headlights at the top of the hill. My brother steered a little to the left of her and kept driving right on by. I stared right into her eyes as we drove by, and she stared back. Her eyes glowed like a cat in the night. As soon as we were out of voice range, I asked my brother what the hell was that? He calmly responded, "Yay, she lives on the golf course and likes to terrorize the workers from time to time. I usually see her out here once a week." Alright. Cool. Cool. I used to work out in the woods in Florida a lot. Creepiest thing would be this day we were working near Big Cypress, tromping through the brush all day. At the end of the day, my coworker and I do a quick drive-through of some of the property and realize the place was absolutely infested with water moccasins. We had been unknowingly essentially walking around a giant water moccasin pit all day. That one kinda effed me up. I'm not sure this counts, but I'm a teacher at an urban public school and was at work late grading and getting ready for the next day. Time had kinda flown by, and before I knew it, it was 7 p.m. I start packing up to leave in a building that is, in theory, locked and empty besides me, when our Alice alarm goes off, indicating an armed intruder in the building. I am 1. Alone 2. Young 3. Freaked AF because I am absolutely not ready to fight a gunman over my lesson plans. I book it out of the school and dive into my car, hearing the alarm blaring the entire time. I peel out the parking lot, and can see in my rear view the alarm lights still flashing and debate never going back, cause F at Lamau. Turns out they were doing routine maintenance and didn't send out an email to the teachers. We were wrapping up for the day in northern Canada. I am fueling up the side boom, am all by myself at this point cause I was tired of listening to the laborers whine of the cold, so I told them I would take care of the rest. Think bulldozer with no blade but a giant metal boom on the side that we use to razor and lower pipe. It's February, so pitch black. I keep hearing some weird sound. I can't quite hear it cause the pump is too loud. I search around a couple times and see nothing. I get in the truck and take off, drive past the front of the side boom to see a cougar sitting on top of a dirt pile 15 feet away. The damn thing was just watching me there and probably could have ended me without me even realizing it. I've never seen a cougar in the wild before, and it's hard to understand just how big they are and how powerful until you see one up close. That thing leapt off the 6 feet pile and probably didn't touch ground for 15 to 20 feet. It's terrifying to think something so big and powerful could just be sitting there deciding if they want to make you dinner. My mom used to live in a small town in the Cascade Mountains and worked as a forest ranger. The creepiest thing that happened was when the oldest male ranger kept hitting on her and trying to get her to come home with him, not very out of the ordinary. But many years later, after she'd left the town, she found out he had been convicted of manslaughter and had killed a young female ranger right before she got hired. She would have probably been his next target. I've been fishing out in the Gulf of Mexico where they have some oil rigs. This rig wasn't being used, from what we knew, so we would get pretty close to it to fish for red snapper. While we were out there, we could have sworn we heard screams of a woman over and over. It was some shit, but the explanation was the wind making the noises as it blew through the rig. Well, that's what we were told, but it totally creeped us the F out. I work as a polar bear guard. As in, I escort people across tundra and mountains and protect them from polar bears. I once saw a snowman totem with reindeer antlers coming out of his head. It was deformed, full of bullet holes and rather creepy. I work off a secluded / wooded area here in Texas. Every now and again when I finish with a job site, I'll pop into the head office. It's the creepiest feeling at night, mostly no light, and I've seen a bobcat a couple of times. The kicker is, the walls are all glass, so when I have the light on inside, I know I'm being watched by someone or something. Edit. BLM stands for Bureau of Land Management. Spent a summer in Wyoming going to BLM land and other remote locations collecting data on bats and herpetofauna. Heard a lot of weird noises like mountain lions screaming, deer snorting, what sounded like cows fighting. Woke up one morning to find 2 bull moose sleeping 20 yards behind my tent. All of this was part of the job until one night a truck was driving towards us when we were on a BLM square in the southwestern part of the state. The truck was going overland, no road, and was slowly driving at us. It stopped about 100 yards away, turned off the lights, and we could see a person get out. They walked a full circle around us at 100 yards away, got back in the truck and turned around. This was after dark and this shadowy figure did a complete circle around us. You could hear them walking through the sagebrush and I'm sure they could hear us talking. We packed up after that and drove to a hotel an hour away. I called the office and told them I was taking a gun when we went back out. Didn't like having the bear mace as our only defense. I used to work in the Gulf of Mexico on oil rigs for years, and it may not exactly be creepy, but I found it really unsettling. In deep, open water, the water itself is really clear, so everyone can plainly see all the tuna and barracudas hanging around the rig waiting for the onboard cook to throw off whatever food waste he needs to. Every once in a while a huge great white shark would swim up from underneath and snatch a tuna, and it really took like less than a second. They're really scary. My parents live pretty far back in the country and have one neighboring house. The neighbors would let their basset hound outside for about 10 minutes to use the bathroom every morning. One morning they let him out, and he didn't come back inside. After a couple minutes they walked out to his favorite bathroom spot, and found his head. Judging from the tracks, a mountain lion had ambushed him and apparently torn his head off before carrying the body away. What I thought was the creepiest part was that the family hadn't heard a sound. Spent a summer doing conservation work out in the absolute middle of nowhere in Wyoming. Was part of a crew that would spend 2 weeks camping in remote places to do manual labor in places machines couldn't get to. For this story, we were building new hiking/biking trails in the back portion of a designated wilderness area in a high-altitude desert. This means that the nearest civilization was a 2-hour car ride to a town of 41 people in a sandy soil area where tracks last forever. It was the middle of our stint during the early part of the night where everyone else had gone to bed, but I stayed up to read, so maybe 11:30 or so. Still pitch black outside, clouds had covered stars. So my headlamp was probably the only light on in a 40-mile radius. Suddenly I hear footsteps walking around our camp and head towards the tents from where I was in the community tent. That sound immediately put me on edge as I felt the hair on my arms raise and my adrenaline spike. I recall thinking to myself that two things are very wrong, since the person was not using a light to see and the footsteps were not coming towards me from the tents, rather it was the opposite. Within the 4 seconds it took me to drop my book, get up, and turn the corner of the tent to cast my light on the sleeping tents. The sound had stopped, but I saw tracks in dirt before me. Looked like they came from one end of camp, looked into my tent, walked through the sleeping tents and kept going out of camp again. I don't know if I was making too much noise or not by walking around, but the rest of my crew ended up waking up and asking me what was going on from inside their tents. After explaining what I found, they all got up to look at the boot prints in the dirt. They were damn near perfect copies of my own boots except for one small thing. I had a rock stuck in my treads that messed up the symmetry. I was wearing fairly common work boots, except I also happened to wear US size 15 double-wide boots, so there was no way in hell this was one of the other crew members. I don't think any of us slept much that night. Never saw or heard anything more after that night. A light rain removed the tracks a couple days later, but I do remember none of us were willing to step on the prints themselves and choose to step over them like cracks in the sidewalk. I work on large ships. If you get a clear view of a hull or passage that runs the whole length, you can actually see the whole ship warp and twist with the sea. If the passage isn't very well lit, it can look like a scene from a horror movie. I used to own a horse boarding and training farm with about 45 acres surrounded by woods. I used to spend the night there quite a bit, because I had to start chores early in the morning, so if I stayed too late it wasn't worth it to drive home. One night at about midnight my dog started to bristle up and growl at the door of the office I slept in, and then my iPod, which I kept on a speaker in the middle of the barn, started blasting out Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire at full volume, which I definitely hadn't left it on. Let me tell you, that song is fucking freaky as shit in the middle of the night. Like shit your pants freaky. My dog was full on growling and barking at the door, so I cracked it and let him run out, figuring that if someone were in or around the barn he'd get them. Anyone there would have been trespassing at that time of night. After a few minutes I went out of the office into the barn aisle, with a bat, to turn off the creepy-ass music. The light I usually kept on so I could see around was off, so it was pitch dark in most of the barn. My dog was just staring out the barn door, which I kept open in the summer to keep the horses cooler, with his hair bristled, but wasn't leaving the barn, which he was allowed to do. I wrote it off as creepy as fuck, but ultimately just one of those things, you know, like it's weird and I can't explain it, but there's got to be an explanation I'm just not privy to. But the real scary part is that my property shared a private gate in back with the property closest to mine, which had a gate at the back. Most of my property was fenced because of the horses, and the property next to mine was like dozens of acres fenced with a chain link fence, which if you know anything about rural fencing is not done. Anyways, we found out later that the owner of the adjoining property was Todd Colehip, the South Carolina serial killer. He had a woman chained up like a dog on his property who he and his friends would rape and walk around the property on a leash. He also had some bodies of people he killed buried on his property. He was doing all that stuff while I lived next to him. In fact, I used to ride on his property but would always turn around if I heard machinery, in retrospect probably burying bodies, or got the creeps, like something would tell me to turn around and go home. I was probably one of the few, if not only, person besides his friends who were raping the woman, to go on his property while all that was going on. I spent several seasons working at a remote field camp in Antarctica, over 1,000 kilometers from the main station in McMurdo. Every once in a while, a skew bird or Antarctic tern would accidentally end up following one of the small planes, Twin Otter, out to our camp. Once there though, they'd basically be stranded with no way to get back to the coast. I'd get out of my tent some mornings and see a lonely tern circling overhead, knowing it was a dead bird flying. It was quite creepy. Along these lines, when birds, or seals, do die down there, it's so cold and dry, that their bodies don't decay either. They essentially mummify. Outside McMurdo at Scott's Discovery Hut, there is still a perfectly preserved seal carcass from 1912 sitting by the entrance of the hut. I've worked in Canada's north for a few years now in oil and gas. It's pretty creepy when during night shift you realize a moose has just been standing at the tree line staring you down for an unknown length of time. Or finding bear tracks crossing the tracks you just made 5 minutes ago. Honestly, the silence of a snowy forest in the dead of night 100s of km away from anything is pretty spooky. When your only contact to the outside world is a radio channel nobody's listening to, you feel pretty alone. I was the creepy occurrence. I live on a ranch off of a quite dirt road. Our distant neighbors, nearest house is about 1 mile away as the crow flies, have had issues with people stealing things out of their outbuildings and storage sheds in the area. It was also late in the year, so it was starting to get dark around 6 p.m. So as a result, every time I would see headlights go down our road I would watch to make sure they weren't stopping on the property. One evening I see a vehicle going very slowly down the road and come to a stop at the end of our driveway, about 120 yards from our front porch. The vehicle is parked right in front of a 60s pickup I have parked, so I think whoever it is might be looking to steal it, or just looking over the property. Whatever the case, I decide to put on a black coat and grab my rifle to go investigate. It's dark out, so I stay out of the headlights of the vehicle so I can get close. I can tell it is a white van, but I don't see anything else distinguishing about the van. When I'm about 50 yards away, the van backs up and turns into our driveway. I freeze as the headlights swash across me standing in the middle of my driveway, and I see the reflective FedEx logos on the side of the van. Needless to say, the FedEx driver probably shit his pants as he suddenly sees a dark figure standing in the middle of a field, in the dark, holding a rifle. Surprisingly, after I try to give a friendly wave and smile, he continues up the driveway to the house, and I get to explain the situation and we both have a laugh. So that's how I got to be the creepy guy in some FedEx delivery driver's story. Working on ships. There was one night I was on a ship sailing through Alaskan waters. And it happened to be my first night ever seeing northern lights. I can't believe how awesome that was. It made the sky clear, made the night look like it was dusk. We were able to see clearly for miles. Few buddies and I hit the roof, or what we call Lido deck, at 1 a.m. just to gaze at it. An hour or so in, there was 6 of us on top, nearly the entire crew now. A big white spotlight shines at us. We were near land, but where the spotlight was above the water and it wasn't low enough to be on a ship. This was very high up. It shined on us for about 15 to 20 seconds. Once the light turned off, we looked to see what it was. Saw nothing, no trace of an aircraft or anything. Couple minutes go by and the same light shined on us. This time it was on the other side of our vessel, above mountains. Still, unable to see what it was. We all saw it. We all have never seen any aircrafts hovering above these waters, especially at 2 a.m. We don't know what it was. We think it might have been some sort of silenced aircraft the military was probably doing drills or something. But anyways, that was one of the weirder things to happen out on the ocean. I worked at a state park for a few years. One day a co-worker was doing trail maintenance and a human skull rolled out of the woods onto the trail in front of him. Turns out it was a man who had been on the run from the police and was living in our woods. Evidently it was a good hiding place because they hadn't found him until then. Used to teach outdoor education, which was essentially just summer camp during the school year, and school groups would come up and spend a few days at the camp. On their last night we would always tell them a scary story around the campfire. It was the same scary story every time. We worked in partners, so there were always 2 staff members for every school group. One staff member would tell the story and the other staff member would go hide in the forest and make scary noises. So, I'm telling the story and every few minutes there's like a snap of a twig or rustling in the bushes, and of course as always the kids all get freaked out and they start getting scared. It's very fun. Well, as I'm telling a story I'm walking around the campfire looking at all the kids' faces and I noticed a familiar one. My partner Eric. Sitting there smiling at me, wondering why I'm staring at him. My heart has never started beating so fast in my life. Eventually I sped through the story and all the kids left, and I explained to Eric that I thought it was him in the woods, and his eyes got very wide and he said, "Are you telling me that that wasn't one of the staff members?" So we both ran back to the main road. I was serving as a fireman for my nation's compulsory national service. Once, we were called into the forest to retrieve a body who was found hanging on a noose, deep along one of the running trails. He had apparently committed suicide by hanging himself off a tree, was found by a few morning joggers. What's creepy was, we found a straw doll at the foot of the tree. It was stabbed with a few red bobby pins in the head, facial area. And there was also an unknown talisman that was half burnt where the doll was sitting. When we took the body down, we had to carry him a few kilometers out of the forest, and halfway along the journey, a previously unnoticed wound on his face started bleeding. One of my men swore that it was bleeding from the same spot as where the bobby pin was stuck on the doll, but we could not confirm it as we left the doll where his body was found, for the police. Passed the body to the paramedics and booked our way out of the area. Edit. Well, thank you for the upvotes and the award. Glad that everyone enjoyed the story. Yes, this happened in Southeast Asia, where almost all religion exists here. I worked in a store once in a really small town that was always absolutely dead, a customer every hour or so, shifts all alone too, which I'm sure wasn't even legal, but hey. Anyway, it's a dark evening and I'm sat on Reddit as usual when I hear the door open. I look up and see the back of a man as he begins walking down the first aisle towards the tin foods, and he appears to be talking to someone on the phone. I think nothing of it and go back to Reddit. All of a sudden I get this intense smell of soil and earth. I look up and the man's approaching the counter and he's wearing some kind of overalls, and his face and long gray hair and body is just covered in dirt. That's when I notice he isn't on the phone at all and is just talking to himself in this absolutely bizarre tone. He sounded like a cartoon elf or something. He's just sort of murmuring and doing this really weird ha-ha-ha sort of laugh. I'm just frozen solid, as he stood at the counter in front of me thinking I'm about to be killed, when a policeman storms through the door. He asks if I'm okay, to which I don't respond because I'm just in a complete state of what the fuck is happening. Tells the man to come outside, to which he starts murmuring gibberish and saying the words legal over and over again. They come grab the man and put him in the back of the police car, and that's the last I ever heard of it. I have no idea who he was, what was going on, but I have never been so afraid of another person before, you know, when you just sense a bad situation. So grateful the police showed up when they did. Actually, I don't work in remote places, but when my father was sent to Alwar, Rajasthan for archaeological study, I encountered a very strange thing. Our house was near a small forest. One morning I saw a group of blue bulls, a kind of Asian antelope. They were 5 in number, and they were running in circles around a skull for like 30 minutes, and then one of them took it into the forest and they all followed him silently. It was such a weirdo sight, it still gives me creeps. My dad told me a sea tale of his days working on ocean-going barges. He said one night they were underway with heavy seas, and had to adjust the tie-up between the tugboat and the barge. Forgive my nautical blasphemy, I'm butchering these terms. He was the one with the time offshore. He described doing anything on deck, at night, in a storm, as about the most dangerous thing you possibly do, because outside of the weather and risk of going overboard, there was such high tension on various cables that if anything snapped it might come across the deck and cut someone in half. Now, he said this particular seagoing tug had some history. One of the previous crew had gone missing before Dad's time on the crew, and from the way it wasn't discussed, but occasionally alluded to, there may have been foul play. So in the midst of the storm, with danger and tension high, an argument broke out. 2 of the crew started yelling at each other, and at the moment that everyone thought it might come to violence, a fire axe flew across the deck and landed between their feet. No one was near the wall where it had been strapped down. A fire axe has its own bracket welded to a wall, with straps to hold it in place unless it's needed. They don't just come loose on their own, and the odds of it landing at their feet were impossible. Except, that the two arguing were also the ones who had fought with the lost sailor. They did not fight. They put the axe back in the wreck. Everyone finished their work quietly, and it was not spoken of again until they returned to shore. Merchant seaman here. Nothing particularly creepy, most of the time you're too focused on not hitting anything, getting position fixes, updating logbooks, etc. to really think about paranormal or spooky crap. But the closest thing to creepy I've experienced recently has been a strange transmission over the radio. It started with a series of Morse code beeps followed by an accented female voice listing off random letters and numbers. To know what the F that was about. Edit, I should clarify, it was definitely number station Y, and obviously radio propagation is a thing, but this was off the Gulf of Mexico on a hot day. I do a lot of work out in the woods. Creepiest thing was finding some headless doves. I also found sticks arranged in circles and paint on the trees in the same spot. Not sure if it was part of a ritual or not, but that's what I saw. Edit, okay, lots of great points that it could have been just wildlife or cats catching the doves. That's totally possible. I've seen cats do that before too. To add some more context, the type of doves found were not native to this area. It's possible they escaped or were released and had a run-in with a hungry house cat. And the painted circle of trees and sticks nearby was coincidence. Who knows, I certainly don't know what really happened, so it's all speculation. It's still the weirdest / creepiest thing I've ever found.